So, how do you build a truly fair society? It's a massive question, right? And it gets even trickier as places like Japan become more diverse. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating debate on affirmative action. We'll look at the sharpest arguments on both sides and see which one actually comes out on top. You know, this whole thing really just boils down to one central question. Is affirmative action a powerful tool for justice, or does it accidentally create a brand new kind of injustice? It's a tough one. And before we can even begin to answer that, we all need to be on the same page about what we're actually talking about. Okay, so here's the key thing to get. This isn't about just sitting back and hoping for the best. The big word here is proactive. That means you have to actively step in, you have to intervene to fix the problems that are left over from past inequality. The whole goal is to make sure everyone actually has an equal opportunity to succeed. And look, this isn't just some abstract academic debate. The source material we're looking at focuses on Japan, but really this is a question that every single society that's changing and growing has to grapple with. How do you fix disadvantages that are kinda, well, baked right into the system? That's what makes this conversation so important, so urgent, right now.
All right, let's kick things off with the opening arguments. This is where you really see the two sides draw their lines in the sand.
And boom, right out of the gate, you see the core of the conflict. One side says, this is a vital tool to fix a broken system. The other side says, whoa, hold on, this is a well-meaning idea that's just going to create a whole new set of problems. It's a huge clash. So, the people arguing for affirmative action, their whole case starts from one big idea. The playing field just isn't level. They argue that factors like your gender, where you're from, or a disability can hold you back no matter how talented you are. So for them, this is all about just getting people to the same starting line. And they don't stop there. They also say, hey, a more diverse team is actually a stronger team. It brings more ideas, more innovation. It's not just fair, it's smart business. Now the case against it, it hinges on a really powerful principle, meritocracy. The idea that the best person for the job should get it. Full stop. They say affirmative action completely undermines this, and it leads to what they call reverse discrimination, which can create a lot of division and resentment. And they raise a huge practical question. How do you even decide who gets help and for how long? They argue we shouldn't be using a Band-Aid like this, but instead we should be fixing the deep root causes, like making sure everyone gets a great education. Okay, now we get to the really interesting part, the cross-examination. This is where both sides really have to defend their positions, and we get to see if their arguments can actually withstand the pressure. And the proponent comes out swinging with a massive question. They go right for the jugular of the opponent's entire argument. They ask, is our society really based on merit alone? I mean, what a challenge, right? It cuts right to the core. So how do you even answer that? The opponent doesn't back down, though. They fire right back and say, hey, it's not that simple. They argue that the gaps we see in society come from all sorts of complex things, not just discrimination. Things like personal choices, your environment. And they're really worried that as soon as you start making policies for specific groups, you're heading down a slippery slope to creating new kinds of unfairness. Their solution? Stick to the big, universal fixes that help everybody, like reforming education. But then, the opponent lands what might be their biggest punch. They shift the whole conversation from abstract philosophy to the nitty-gritty of how this would actually work. And they ask the absolute killer question. Don't these numerical targets just turn into rigid quotas that force you to ignore merit? So how does the proponent respond to that? Well, they try to completely reframe it. They say, look, you're thinking about this all wrong. These targets aren't quotas to hire unqualified people. Instead, they're like a check engine light for the system. They force a company to stop and ask, wait a minute, why aren't we hiring qualified people from this group? What's our blind spot? Then they take it a step further, arguing that we have a moral responsibility to fix the flawed systems we've inherited. Because, saying let's fix education is great for the long term, but people are being unfairly held back today. All right, so this all builds up to the final arguments. This is the last chance for both sides to make their case, to distill everything they've said into one last powerful appeal. And when you listen to both sides, it really comes down to this. What's the bigger risk? The proponent is basically saying the biggest danger is doing nothing. It's letting a known injustice continue. But the opponent says, no, the biggest danger is a bad solution. They think a flawed policy could actually make the problem even worse. So, who won the debate? Well, before I tell you the verdict, it's really important to understand how the judge made the call. It wasn't about who was more passionate or who spoke louder. It was all about who built the stronger, more logical case based on three key things. Did their argument make sense? Did they have good evidence? And how well did they poke holes in the other side's points?
And after weighing everything, all the arguments and rebuttals, the judge made a decision. The winner was the proponent.
So why? What tipped the scales? Well, it really came down to who had a more concrete plan for a problem that's happening right now. The proponent not only gave a really sharp analysis of the existing inequality, but critically, they had answers for the tough questions about risk. In the end, their proactive, let's do something now approach was just more convincing than the opponent's call for big, long-term reforms, which just felt a little too general and a little too slow.
But you know, a judge's decision in a debate like this, that's not really the end of the story. The real point isn't just about picking a winner. It's about getting all of us to think a little harder about this stuff. So we're left looking at two very different ideas of how to get to a fair society. Do you use a targeted fix for the problems we see right now? Or do you focus on a massive, long-term overhaul for the future? The debate crowned a winner, but the real question is still out there for all of us. What does true fairness actually look like? Do we get there by treating everyone exactly the same, even if they're starting from totally different places? Or do we have to treat people differently to make sure everyone gets a truly equal shot? And that, right there, is the core of this whole complicated issue.